The ballroom froze on a single scream. "My ring is gone, check her bag." The words didn't slip out. They detonated. Dozens of champagne flutes paused midair. The chandelier's crystal shimmer seemed to harden, like light itself was holding its breath. At the center of the storm stood Elise Carrington, the billionaire family's golden daughter, silk gown flowing like a flag of privilege. Her hand jabbed toward one woman, one guest she had decided didn't belong. That woman was Jordan Hale, 38 years old, calm, statuesque, dressed in a midnight blue gown that caught shadows more than it caught light. She didn't flinch when Elise's voice tore through the hall. She didn't blink when the accusation wrapped around her name like chains. A uniformed officer, summoned by nothing more than wealth's command, closed in. His hand brushed her arm as if claiming possession. Around them, men in tuxedos leaned forward. Women in sequined dresses whispered behind manicured hands. Elise stepped closer, fury blazing in her face, her tiara tilted, catching a shard of light. "I said check her bag. Do it now." Jordan's lips pressed into silence. No protest, no begging. She stood rooted, as if the marble beneath her heels had fused to her resolve. And here's where we pause. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Jordan. The hall wasn't quiet anymore. It was buzzing, the kind of low electric hum that means judgment is being written in real time. Elise's brothers exchanged smug glances. A guest in red mouthed the word thief. Another guest lifted his phone, red record light glowing, unsure if truth or spectacle would spill first. Jordan inhaled once, slowly. Her eyes moved not to Elise, not to the officer, but to the audience, the wealthy witnesses who treated humiliation like theater. She knew this play. She'd been cast as the suspect before, but tonight was different. Tonight the stage was hers, because the very family that thought they could brand her a criminal had no idea who they had just accused. They didn't know she held the power to erase the contract that fed their empire. They didn't know her silence was not fear, it was the opening note of a reckoning. And in moments, the world would learn the cost of confusing dignity for weakness. Jordan Hale hadn't entered this ballroom as a thief, a guest, or even a friend of the family. She had entered as the silent hinge on which a $900 million deal was about to swing. But no one in the Carrington family knew that. Not yet. Her presence tonight had been deliberate. She didn't arrive in a fleet of black cars or draped in designer labels. No glittering diamonds, no bodyguards. Just a single navy gown, understated heels, and the poise of someone who understood that true wealth never needs to shout. She walked in alone, no entourage, no title announced, slipping past the velvet ropes like an ordinary invitee. To the outside eye, she was just another name on the guest list, one that didn't command attention. And that was the point, because Jordan remembered every time a room like this had once made her feel small. At 24, she'd been dismissed from a bank lobby because her check looked suspicious. At 31, she was asked to leave a shareholders' meeting she had personally financed because staff-only signs didn't imagine her face. And at 38, standing now under chandeliers carved like frozen lightning, she had carried those memories with her not as wounds, but as weapons. The Carringtons, for all their generational polish, had no idea that the guest they targeted was the one person holding the power to erase their empire's next expansion. The deal being toasted tonight, their merger, their pride was hers to approve. One signature, one phone call, and the contract could live or die. Yet she hadn't come to flaunt it. She had come to observe, to see if this family's reputation for arrogance was rumor or reality. Her eyes had caught details most guests missed. The way the patriarch raised a glass but not an eyebrow when a waiter stumbled, the sharp laughter from Elise whenever a junior staffer passed by, the careless way place cards had been arranged so that old money faced center stage while newcomers were tucked against the walls. Jordan had noticed it all. She had taken her seat quietly, letting the champagne bubble around her like static. And then, just as she expected, the storm arrived. Now Elise stood inches away, accusing, her voice dripping with certainty born not from truth but from power never questioned. Guests leaned in, hungry for spectacle, blind to the fact that the woman in the crosshairs was not a pawn but the hand that moved the entire board. Jordan did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every second of silence was an investment. every measured breath. A reminder that she was not here to fight for dignity, she embodied it. In that gilded room, the Carringtons thought they had chosen their target. But Jordan knew better. They had chosen their judge. The ballroom's string quartet faltered, boughs hanging midair. What had been background music now sounded like a funeral march. 2 security officers moved in, their jackets sharp, earpieces glowing faintly beneath crystal light. The taller one cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we need to check your belongings." His voice was flat, procedural, but his eyes betrayed eagerness like he'd been waiting all night for someone to single out. Elise folded her arms, triumphant. "See? Even security knows. People like her don't belong at Carrington events." The words rippled outward. Guests exchanged whispers, little sparks of confirmation. One man muttered, "Typical." Another woman leaned over her glass flute, whispering, "She must have slipped in." Jordan didn't move. Her clutch rested on the table beside her glass, untouched. She stood rooted, her spine a quiet pillar against the tide of suspicion. From the far corner, an older gentleman, one of the family's business partners, leaned toward his wife. "I told you, this merger's been attracting the wrong kind of crowd." His wife shushed him, but the damage was done. The sentence hung in the air, poisonous and proud. The security officer reached for Jordan's bag. She placed one hand gently on it, not forceful, just firm enough to halt him. Her eyes met his, calm, unyielding. Across the room, another Carrington cousin added fuel. "If she has nothing to hide, why not let us look? Unless, of course, the ring really is in there." His smirk widened as cameras began to lift higher. Guests weren't just watching anymore, they were documenting. A waiter froze mid-step, tray trembling with champagne. A young woman in a red dress pulled out her phone and whispered to a friend, "I'm recording. This is going viral." Elise's voice rose above the hum. "Don't just stand there. Do your job. Search her." The second officer hesitated. His hand hovered, caught between duty and doubt. The hush of the room pressed down on him like a weight. Elise barked again, louder. "Now!" Jordan's silence stretched thin, but it didn't snap. She didn't plead. She didn't defend. She simply let their arrogance perform for the cameras. Because she knew, the deeper they dug, the sharper their fall would be. And still, the ballroom leaned closer, hungry for spectacle. Jordan didn't resist. She didn't raise her voice. She let the accusations swirl like smoke, curling but never landing. Her hand still rested lightly on the clutch, not clenched, not protective, simply anchored. The officer's fingers hovered inches away, twitching with authority, waiting for permission. The silence between them stretched long enough to make even the chandeliers seem restless. Elise scoffed, tossing her curls. "Look at her! Can't even defend herself!" But that was the defense. Jordan inhaled once, slow and deliberate, as if the entire ballroom existed only to measure her breath. She didn't meet Elise's glare, nor the cousin's smirk, nor the officer's narrowing eyes. Instead, she looked through them, past them like they were déjà vu. Because they were. She had seen this posture before, in a hotel lobby at 19, when a desk clerk told her to wait outside because this area is for paying guests. At 28, when a real estate broker smirked and said her loan must have been co-signed by someone legitimate. At 35, when a boardroom went quiet until she proved she wasn't the assistant but the founder. And now, in this ballroom of glass and marble, she recognized the same performance privilege rehearsing its lines. But tonight, she wasn't 19, 28, or even 35. She was Jordan Hale, CEO, investor, the unseen keystone of the deal these people toasted with careless pride. The officer cleared his throat, uncomfortable with her silence. "Ma'am, this will go easier if you cooperate." Jordan tilted her head slightly. Not agreement, not refusal, just enough to remind him she was listening, but not yielding. The crowd murmured louder. Some interpreted her calm as guilt, others as arrogance. Phones rose higher, their red lights dotting the room like distant fires. Elise smirked wider. "See, guilty people always go quiet." Jordan's lips curved, barely, into something that was not a smile but a signal that she had heard this script too many times to be moved by it. Her silence was not submission. It was strategy. And in that moment, anyone truly paying attention would notice. She wasn't on trial. The Carringtons were. The air grew heavier, charged with an anticipation no violin could cut through. The officer shifted on his feet. Guests whispered more urgently. Elise grew louder, her words tumbling over each other in desperation. But Jordan? She remained still. Still as stone, still as truth waiting to be spoken. The first whisper of dissent came not from a billionaire, but from a busboy. He stood half-hidden near the champagne fountain, no more than 20, his tray trembling under crystal glasses. He leaned to another waiter and muttered, just loud enough for someone to hear, "Her name was on the list. I checked her in myself." The words weren't meant to carry, but in a room vibrating with silence, they landed like a spark on dry wood. A guest in red heels tilted her phone, whispering into her camera, "Something's off. She hasn't even spoken, and they're treating her like a criminal." The live stream counter ticked upward. At the edge of the hall, a junior associate from the Carrington law firm pulled out his phone too, not to record, but to scroll. His brow furrowed. His thumb froze. He had seen the name Jordan Hale before, on documents, on signatures, on the merger agreement itself. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Elise caught the shifting energy and pushed harder. "Why are you all hesitating? This woman stole from us. She doesn't belong here. You've seen her silence, it proves everything." But not everyone agreed. A middle-aged woman in emerald silk, a guest not bound to the family but to the deal, crossed her arms. "Silence proves nothing," she said flatly. The sentence cut through the room, startling even the quartet into stillness. The officer glanced between Elise and the woman in green, his certainty cracking. Cameras kept rising. Dozens now, not one or two. Red lights everywhere, a constellation of doubt aimed at the Carringtons. One man near the back, hair silver, eyes tired, whispered to his companion, "This feels wrong, too rehearsed, too easy." And then the clearest witness stepped forward. A young woman in a server's uniform, dark hair tied back, voice trembling but steady. Her name was on the reservation list. I seated her table myself. Gasps rippled. Elise's face blanched for a moment, then hardened. "Staff don't get to decide who belongs here." But the tide had shifted. The staffer's words had cracked the marble mask. Guests turned, whispering to each other, unease threading the air. Phones buzzed as comments poured in on live streams. "Why won't they let her speak? This looks like profiling. Not a good look for the Carringtons." Jordan still hadn't said a word. She didn't need to. Others were speaking for her now. And in that ballroom of wealth and whispers, one truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The longer she stood silent, the louder everyone else became. The murmurs were beginning to tilt, sympathy slowly bleeding into the room. Elise sensed it and panicked. She needed reinforcements. That's when her uncle, Richard Carrington, the family's patriarch in all but name, rose from his seat near the head table, silver hair slicked back, tuxedo pressed like armor. His presence alone hushed the whispers. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice carried the weight of decades, of inherited power worn like a crown. "This gathering is for trusted partners," he said evenly, though the edge in his tone sliced sharp. "And yet here stands a stranger, accused of theft, refusing to cooperate. That is not the behavior of a guest. That is the behavior of an intruder." Gasps followed, phones tilted higher, capturing every word. The young waitress who had defended Jordan shifted nervously, her courage flickering but not gone. "I told you," she said, voice firmer this time. "She was on the list. I checked her name myself." Richard turned his gaze on her, icy and dismissive. "And you are a waitress, paid to carry trays, not to interpret truth. Be careful your employment doesn't end tonight." The girl shrank back, cheeks flushed, but her words lingered like an ember refusing to die. Elise stepped closer to Jordan, seizing the moment. "You hear that? Even my uncle knows. You're no partner. You're no guest. You're a fraud who thought you could blend in." Jordan still didn't move. Her silence was heavier now, weighted like stone dropped in water, rippling outward until even Richard's certainty trembled at the edges. But he pressed on, unwilling to yield in front of witnesses. "Escort her out," he ordered the officers. "Now, before this spectacle embarrasses us further." The taller officer straightened, relief flashing in his eyes at having authority restored. He reached again for Jordan's arm. The crowd split, half leaning forward, eager for resolution, half recoiling at the sight of force. A woman in emerald silk spoke again, louder this time. "You're making a mistake." Richard cut her down with a glare. "The mistake is allowing this charade to continue." The ballroom pulsed with tension. Some nodded, convinced by his authority. Others shook their heads, unsettled by his cruelty. And in the center stood Jordan Hale, unmoving, a pillar in a storm designed to break her. Her silence was no longer just defiance. It was judgment every second she gave them enough rope to hang themselves with. But the Carringtons, blinded by pride, couldn't see it. Not yet. The order had barely left Richard Carrington's lips when Elise acted. She lunged for Jordan's clutch, snatching it from the table with the satisfaction of a hunter bagging prey. Gasps ricocheted through the hall as the satin strap tore against Jordan's still hand. Elise held the bag aloft like evidence, her voice sharp enough to rattle the glassware. "See? Thieves always hide what they steal." The clutch snapped open in her hands, contents spilling across the marble floor. A slim phone, a silver pen, a folded program from the evening. No ring, nothing but ordinary possessions glinting under the chandelier. The crowd surged closer, necks craning, phones tilting down to capture every angle. Elise didn't falter. She needed the scene, the humiliation. She pointed to the pen. "Look at that engraved. Probably stolen, too." A few guests chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or recoil. The young waitress shook her head, whispering to anyone who'd listen, "This isn't right. This isn't right." But Elise wasn't done. She turned to the officers. "Search her. If you won't, I'll call the police myself." She pulled a phone from her gown's hidden pocket, dialing with exaggerated fury. The hall went silent, every breath suspended. Then her voice rang out, crisp and cutting. "Yes, this is Elise Carrington. We have a thief at our family gala. She's being restrained now. Restrained." The words slashed through the ballroom like a gavel. The taller officer stepped forward again, this time firmer. His hand gripped Jordan's arm, not tentative but forceful, pressing down as if possession were 9/10 of the law. Phones tilted higher. The constellation of red recording lights now blazed like a judgmental sky. One guest whispered, "This will be online in minutes." Another muttered, "They've gone too far." The woman in emerald silk rose fully from her chair. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice loud enough to reach every corner. "You have no proof. You're humiliating her for existing." Richard Carrington waved her off. "Sit down. You'll thank us when the ring is recovered." Jordan didn't resist the officer's grip. She didn't jerk away, didn't shout. She simply stood, rooted, gaze steady, while the chaos orbited around her. And in that silence, in that stillness, the ballroom became something else. Not a party, not a celebration, but a courtroom, with witnesses recording, with the accused unflinching, and with the Carringtons blind to what they had unleashed, digging their own verdict deeper by the second. The officer's grip tightened, his knuckles whitening against Jordan's arm. Elise smirked, phone still pressed to her ear, feeding the police her version of the story. Richard stood proud, convinced the matter was settled, but Jordan moved not with force, not with panic, with precision. Her free hand reached calmly into the spill of belongings on the marble. She picked up her phone, dusted it once against her gown, and pressed a single button. The screen lit up instantly, glowing brighter than the chandeliers. A voice answered before the first ring finished. "Yes, Ms. Hale, we're standing by." The ballroom stiffened. Conversations cut off mid-syllable. Even Elise's smirk faltered, the name catching in her ears. Jordan's voice was low, steady, carrying further than shouting ever could. "Activate protocol. Freeze negotiations. Flag tonight's event for full audit." On the other end, her assistant didn't hesitate. "Understood. Timestamp logged. The system's already notifying legal and finance." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Words like legal and finance didn't belong in the mouth of a so-called thief. They belonged to someone in control. The officer holding her arm hesitated, pressure loosening for the first time. He looked around, uncertain, as if realizing the ground beneath him had shifted. Elise snapped, desperate to regain momentum. "Don't listen to her, she's bluffing. Call the police." But her voice cracked on the last word, betrayed by nerves. Richard's jaw tightened. "Who do you think you're calling? No one here answers to you." Jordan finally turned her gaze on him, calm and unblinking. "Are you certain about that?" The question hung heavy, sharp as glass. Richard opened his mouth, but no answer came. Meanwhile, guests leaned closer, filming every second. A man in the back muttered, "Did she just say audit?" Another whispered, "She's not bluffing. Nobody bluffs with lawyers on standby." The emerald-dressed woman nodded to herself, as though pieces of a puzzle had finally locked into place. Jordan lifted the phone again. "Mark this interaction," she said quietly. "Every word, every hand, every order. They'll want to see how it unfolded. Her assistant's voice came crisp and sure. Logged and archived, Miss Hale. Should I notify the board? That sentence alone cracked the room. The board. The kind of word that didn't come from thieves, but from owners. Richard paled for the first time. Elise's phone slipped an inch in her hand. The officer fully released his grip. Jordan slid the clutch back into her possession. Not hurried, not triumphant, just inevitable. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't moved with anger. But in less than a minute, the ballroom no longer belonged to the Carringtons. It belonged to her. For a moment, silence returned to the ballroom. But it was no longer the silence of suspicion. It was the silence of revelation waiting to be spoken. Jordan lowered her phone, eyes sweeping across the faces fixed on her. Elise's lips trembled around unfinished words. Richard's confidence cracked like porcelain dropped on marble. Guests leaned forward, phones alight, desperate for the next sentence. Jordan let the weight of the moment settle, then spoke. You called me a thief in a room I paid for. You put hands on me during an event financed by my signature. And you dared to strip me of dignity in front of witnesses when, in truth, the only thing stolen tonight is your integrity. The words sliced clean, leaving the air raw. Gasps erupted. A few phones shook in their owners' hands as they realized what they were capturing. Not scandal, but reckoning. Richard blinked hard, trying to steady himself. You expect us to believe? Jordan cut him off, voice firmer now, unshakable. Believe? Ask your lawyers. Ask your board. Ask anyone who's read the merger agreement. My name sits on every page. Jordan Hale, lead investor, controlling partner. The one with the power to end your $900 million future before it begins. The young associate from the Carrington law firm finally stepped forward, voice tight. She's telling the truth. I saw her signature myself, executive override clearance. It's real. The ballroom detonated into noise. Guests erupted into whispers, some in disbelief, others in vindication. The emerald-dressed woman laughed once, sharp and triumphant. I knew it! I knew it! Elise staggered back, clutching her phone like a useless weapon. That's impossible. She came in alone. No one of that stature comes in alone. Jordan's gaze turned to her, cool and steady. Power doesn't need an entourage. It doesn't even need an introduction. It needs only truth. And the truth has been standing in front of you all night. The officer who had held her arm stepped back fully now, shame flickering in his eyes. He muttered, almost to himself, we were about to arrest the owner. Richard's voice rose again, desperate, brittle. Even if this is true, you had no right to come here disguised. Jordan's expression sharpened. Disguised? No, I came as myself. You simply couldn't see me without your prejudice. That blindness is not my disguise. It is your downfall. Phones caught every syllable. Clips were already uploading, already captioned. CEO accused by Carringtons, until she revealed the truth. The young waitress whispered to her fellow staff, awe flooding her voice. She owns the deal. She owns all of this. Jordan lifted her phone once more, pressing it to her ear. Confirm it, she said. Her assistant's voice carried loud and clear across the speakers. Confirmed. Jordan Hale, lead investor and majority shareholder. Every guest in that room is now aware. The reaction was immediate. The ballroom, once dripping with suspicion, now quaked with realization. Faces flushed, whispers turned to exclamations. Someone began clapping hesitant at first, then louder, joined by others until the sound ricocheted off crystal and marble. And in the center, Jordan stood unmoving, not triumphant, not boastful, simply resolute. She had revealed herself, and in doing so, revealed everyone else. The applause thundered through the ballroom like a verdict. What had begun as a spectacle of humiliation was now a coronation of truth. Elise froze in place, tiara trembling as though even the crown no longer recognized her. Her hand dropped the phone to her side, knuckles white, eyes darting desperately toward her uncle for rescue. But Richard was no savior. He stood stiff, pale beneath the chandeliers, his jaw clenching with the slow realization that decades of authority had just crumbled in seconds. The commanding voice that once silenced boardrooms now faltered into nothing. The officers who had gripped Jordan's arm stepped back further, uniforms suddenly heavy with shame. One adjusted his earpiece, pretending to receive a call just to avoid her eyes. The other muttered, "We shouldn't have touched her. God, what have we done?" The young waitress, who had spoken out earlier, pressed a hand to her chest, relief flooding her features. She whispered to the busboy beside her, She wasn't just right. She was everything. His tray wobbled, champagne flutes clinking, as he nodded furiously. Across the hall, guests who had sneered minutes ago now whispered apologies into their live streams. A man in a tuxedo addressed his phone camera directly. "Correction, she's the investor. She owns this deal. This is history in real time." The emerald-dressed woman folded her arms, satisfaction curling at the corner of her mouth. "Integrity wins," she murmured, though loud enough for Elise to hear. Elise snapped, voice cracking. "Stop filming! Everyone put your phones away!" But no one listened. If anything, more phones rose, their tiny red lights doubling, tripling. A guest near the back whispered, "This clip's already on Twitter. 10,000 views. No stopping it now." Richard finally tried to regain footing, his voice a shadow of its former command. We can discuss this privately. There's no need to make a scene." Jordan's silence in response was heavier than any speech. She didn't have to demand respect. It now came to her unbidden, carried in every glance, every hushed whisper, every phone turned in her direction. The Carrington family had lost control. Their polished image, their curated dominance, shattered under the weight of a truth they had tried to erase. One cousin slipped quietly toward the exit, unwilling to be captured in the downfall. Another clutched his drink so tightly the glass cracked, liquid dripping between his fingers. Elise's breathing quickened, her earlier arrogance gone, replaced by panic. The live stream counters soared. Viewers typed furiously, "Unbelievable. They accused her? Carrington's just ended their own deal. Justice in real time." The officers exchanged glances, as if awaiting new orders, but from Jordan now, not the Carringtons. Their authority had been severed, loyalty redirected by the gravity of truth, and through it all, Jordan remained unmoving at the center, still as the axis of the room. The storm had broken, but she was the eye, calm, unshaken, undeniable. For the Carringtons, it was no longer about the missing ring. It was about survival. Every second that passed, their empire shrank beneath the gaze of cameras and the certainty of her words. They weren't just embarrassed. They were exposed. The ballroom was no longer theirs. Every Carrington instinct screamed for control, but control had slipped, dripping away like wine spilled across marble. The family's name, once untouchable, now dangled in front of hundreds of cameras, fragile as glass. Jordan lifted her phone again. Her voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "Nia," she said, speaking to her assistant on the other end. "Prepare termination protocol, effective immediately." The room stiffened. Conversations halted mid-breath. Even Elise's shallow gasps quieted, replaced by dread. "Confirmed," came the crisp reply through the speaker. "Do you wish to proceed with full cancellation, Miss Hale?" Jordan let the silence stretch. She wanted every Carrington in that room to feel it, the weight of a verdict hanging just out of reach. Her eyes moved across the family table, lingering on Richard's pale face, Elise's trembling hands, the cousin's darting eyes. Then she nodded once. "Terminate the deal," she said evenly. "All 900 million. Effective this moment." The gasp that erupted wasn't just sound, it was seismic. Guests clutched their pearls, some gasping, others cheering. Phones surged higher, shaking as live-stream comments exploded. She killed the deal on the spot. 900 million gone in a sentence. "This is justice." Richard stumbled forward, voice cracking. You can't, You've already, Jordan interrupted, humiliated your own partner in the most public way possible. Integrity is the foundation of any alliance, and you proved tonight you have none. Elise shook her head wildly, mascara streaking. "Please, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't know." Jordan's gaze cut through her like steel. "You didn't care to know. You didn't need proof. You needed a target, and you chose me. Now live with the choice." Her assistant's voice carried once more. "Deal terminated. Access revoked. All parties notified." Richard's phone buzzed on the table, then Elise's, then one cousin's, then another's. Notifications lighting up one after another, cold and merciless. Their empire was crumbling in real time, collapse announced by vibrations they could not stop. The officers who had touched Jordan earlier stood frozen, their shame visible. One whispered to the other, "We just watched 900 million vanish." Guests no longer whispered, they spoke openly now. About time someone held them accountable. "They won't recover from this. This is history and we're all witnesses." The emerald-dressed woman raised her glass, voice ringing above the chaos. To Miss Hale for showing us what dignity looks like. Applause followed, louder this time, swelling into a chorus the Carringtons couldn't silence. Jordan lowered her phone. She didn't bask in the applause. She didn't smile. Her expression stayed firm, grounded, as if she had simply carried out necessary business. Richard's voice collapsed into desperation. Jordan, please, reconsider. Decades of partnership, generations of arrogance. Jordan cut in. And tonight, you proved you are unfit to hold my trust or anyone's. This isn't just about a ring. This is about respect, and you forfeited it. Elise staggered forward, tears threatening. We'll apologize. We'll go public. We'll... Jordan turned slightly, her gown catching the chandelier's fractured light. You already went public. Every phone in this room saw who you are. The world will decide what that apology is worth. The applause grew louder, guests standing now, clapping not for spectacle but for vindication. The live stream numbers spiked again, tens of thousands, then more. Elise's phone slipped from her grasp, clattering on the marble. Richard slumped back into his chair, shoulders sagging beneath the weight of a fallen empire. And Jordan, unshaken, stood in the center of it all. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't begged. She had simply acted decisive, irreversible. The deal was dead. The Carringtons were finished, and every witness in that room knew exactly why. The ballroom, once a theater of accusation, now stood transformed into a hall of judgment. But the gavel had already fallen, and it wasn't in Richard Carrington's hand. It was in Jordan Hale's. Phones still hovered in the air, but no one was laughing anymore. No one whispered thief or fraud. They whispered her name, Jordan Hale, the woman who had ended a dynasty's deal without lifting her voice. Richard sat slumped, his authority hollow. Elise, streaked with tears and mascara, stared at the shattered remains of her pride on the marble floor. Cousins avoided eye contact, shrinking into tuxedos that no longer felt like armor. Their empire had unraveled not through scandal in the press, but through their own arrogance exposed in real time. Jordan didn't look at them again. They were already finished. Her attention turned instead to the witnesses, the guests, the staff, the servers, the live stream audience swelling by the second. She spoke not to the guilty, but to the world. You saw it, she said, her voice measured, steady. How quickly judgment came, how easily dignity was dismissed, how loudly prejudice tried to speak for truth, and you saw what silence can do when it belongs to someone who doesn't need to prove herself. The applause rose again, but she lifted a hand gently, silencing it. The quiet that followed wasn't empty, it was reverent. I don't need a camera, Jordan continued. I don't need to beg for your belief. I am the result of every room that underestimated me, every insult, every dismissal, every moment someone thought I didn't belong. Tonight wasn't new, it was only the latest attempt. And now, it is the last. Her words landed heavy, searing themselves into every phone recording, every witness's memory. Elise whispered, broken, "We didn't know." Jordan's gaze cut through her. "You didn't want to know, and that choice cost you everything." From the corner, the young waitress stood tall, tears shining in her eyes. She whispered to her friend. She turned their cruelty into her weapon. The busboy nodded, voice shaking. And she won. Jordan adjusted her clutch, the same one Elise had torn from her minutes before, now reclaimed with finality. She turned toward the exit. As she moved, guests parted instinctively, forming a path, heads bowed slightly, not in fear, but in respect. The live stream comments kept flooding in. This is history. True power doesn't shout. She just rewrote the rules. Richard's last attempt at words died in his throat. Elise collapsed into her chair, tiara slipping sideways, symbol of a crown that meant nothing now. At the threshold of the ballroom doors, Jordan paused, her back still to the family. She didn't turn fully, only enough for her voice to carry one final sentence that would echo far beyond the marble walls. I don't need to steal a ring. I came to measure integrity, and tonight you proved you had none. Then she walked out, heels striking marble like punctuation. The applause erupted once more, rising, unstoppable. Guests clapped not only for Jordan but for what she represented. Dignity defended, power revealed, justice carried out without a shout. The cameras stayed up, the story already spiraling outward, unstoppable. And as the heavy doors closed behind her, Jordan Hale left the Carrington legacy in ruins, reminding everyone watching in the room and online that silence, when owned by the powerful, is the loudest verdict of all.